physical scientist, Ms. Getz here. I am going to talk to you a little bit about the chemistry of air pollution. So in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be really thinking about how chemical reactions impact the air that we breathe. And to look at that, we're going to think a little bit about what is in the air that we breathe, and then what is this air pollution thing that you've definitely heard about. So to start us off, I'm actually using these slides that are from the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency because I thought they were a really good overview for you of what air pollution is. And you can also download these slides into Notability to view them yourself if you would like before taking the quiz that comes right after this. So we're going to think about what is air, and then what are some of these different air pollutants that you've probably heard of before, at least a couple of them. So the air you are breathing right now is made up of primarily nitrogen gas. So nitrogen gas is the biggest part of the air here on Earth. And then we have oxygen gas. You're very familiar with that as well. Nitrogen gas is N2. It's a gas of nitrogen atoms bonded to each other. And then oxygen gas is also a gas made of oxygen atoms bonded to each other. Then we have less than 2% is other gases. So you've probably heard of carbon dioxide. That's that gas that you breathe out and that plants actually take in when they go through photosynthesis. We have some other gases you've maybe heard of, like ozone or carbon monoxide or ammonia. So these are other gases. We have water vapor, so gaseous water is also in the air, and nitrogen dioxide. And also some very small percentage of noble gases like argon or neon are in our air. Those are pretty important though. So mostly our atmosphere is nitrogen, oxygen, and we have these trace other things that are pretty darn important for life on Earth. And as you can imagine, breathing air, pretty great. It's really good to have the quality of the air you breathe be a good quality. But there can be a lot of different pollutants. We can have solid pollutants, liquid or gaseous pollutants, and they can come from lots of different sources. So they can be from burning of fossil fuels, it says right here, like coal or oil or diesel. They also can come from volcanic eruptions or forest fires, and we're going to learn about some of those pollutants right now. So pollutants can take the form of primary pollutants or secondary pollutants, and all of these are things that are in the air. So a primary pollutant is one that is emitted directly from something. So for example, as you breathe out, you emit carbon dioxide, and that's actually considered a primary pollutant. You've probably heard about global warming, and that's a big effect of carbon dioxide, having a higher concentration of carbon in the air than we had before. Then we have some other primary pollutants here, like carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, ammonia. All of these are primary pollutants. And this thing that sounds a little weird, PM, it's called particulate matter. And particulate matter is a really big one that we're going to be digging into in our later assignments. So this PM, particulate matter, is really important. So these are all primary pollutants. They are emitted directly by things like wildfires, like vehicles, like your car, the exhaust that comes from your car or lawnmower, like a power plant or a factory or agriculture where we have things growing. Then we have these things that are called secondary pollutants, and they are when these primary pollutants interact with each other. And they can go through chemical reactions in our atmosphere to make these different secondary pollutants, such as ozone. Maybe you heard a while ago about acid rain and the concern for acid rain. Well, you can get some acids formed by these primary pollutants like sulfuric acid. And as you can imagine, having acid in the atmosphere, not such a great thing. So we have all of these different pollutants, and we're going to talk about a few of them specifically today. So the main primary pollutants, we've got carbon monoxide, and this is a byproduct of incomplete combustion. So combustion is any time we burn something, and this is combustion that didn't quite go all the way. And this is something that can happen pretty easily inside of a furnace or a car. And so especially if the car is not moving very quickly, you can get carbon monoxide produced pretty easily. And it's colorless, odorless, and actually pretty poisonous. So it's harmful to us because it competes with oxygen inside of your lungs, inside of your red blood cells, and that's not good. And it can really lead to some really dangerous consequences like death. We've got nitrogen dioxide. Nitrogen dioxide, again, most in urban areas like in the Twin Cities, comes from exhaust emissions. So exhaust emissions means things like cars and trucks and buses. As they burn gasoline or diesel fuel, they emit this nitrogen dioxide. And there can be different varieties of this. Nitrogen dioxide is the most common of the nitrogen oxides. But all of these are not great to breathe in. They're not good for your lungs and can lead to some difficulties breathing. Sulfur dioxide is most primarily from natural sources, like volcanoes or hot springs, but it can also be emitted by human industrial activities. And this one can be pretty dangerous inhaled in the body as well. And when it interacts with those molecules in the atmosphere, that's when we can get that acid rain thing. We get sulfuric acid produced when our sulfur dioxide molecules interact with other molecules in the atmosphere. Our last pollutant here, second to last, my bad. Our last primary pollutant here is particulates. And particulate matter is really common. So it's just tiny pieces of solids that are in the air. And so you can think of this kind of like dust particles, but it's more than just dust particles. It's lots of different types of particles. So to get a sense for how small particulate matter, these little solids in the air are, we have a picture of a human hair here. This is a little grain of beach sand. Our particulate matter in the air is much smaller than that. So you'd have, say, 4 little particulate matters across the width of a human hair. So they're very small, but they come from lots of different things. A lot of particulate matter comes from vehicle exhaust, from burning things, and some of them are from other things like construction, where you can imagine there might be a lot of dust involved. But the most dangerous ones are ones that are very small, and those are really common with combustion reactions. And things that can be inhaled can actually pass into your blood supply, which is pretty dangerous. So we're going to be investigating this particulate matter more later this week. We've also got ammonia as a primary pollutant, and this is something that is a big pollutant in agriculture. So agriculture, when we have animals producing waste, the ammonia in animal waste, like poop and pee, is actually a pollutant when it gets into the air. So it's a fertilizer in the ground, but when it's aerosolized, it's a pollutant. And so this is another primary pollutant we have. Our secondary pollutants include ozone, which is O3. That's not how oxygen usually is. Oxygen is usually O2. And when we have O3, that's when we can get some serious issues, both for human, like your ability to breathe, your ability to function, but it's also damaging to plants, and it can affect buildings and building materials, because the thing about O3 is that it's really reactive. It can chemically react with lots of different materials, and so that's not great. And so when we have nitrogen oxides, these volatile compounds, volatile means they're very reactive, they can create this O3, which is a colorless gas, but is a big problem in our atmosphere. And there is actually a layer of the atmosphere that has a lot of ozone, But that's far away from the ground. That's really far away from the ground, and it's actually up in our atmosphere and protects us from some of the sun's harmful ultraviolet rays. Here on the ground, we don't want a bunch of O3 because it is really chemically reactive and it's harmful to humans. We have acid rain, like I mentioned before. So this forms when you have different volatile compounds like sulfur dioxide or nitrogen oxides react with stuff in the air. So this is a chemical reaction occurs in the air, and we get an acid in the air. And so when it rains, that acid comes to the ground, and that can cause buildings to slowly degrade. That can be harmful for the wildlife around us and the ecosystem around us. And it can also be harmful to humans and cause irritation just from the rain, which you can imagine is not a good thing. Then our last secondary pollutant is actually something that I'm sure you've seen examples of, even if you didn't realize it. It's called nutrient enrichment. And nutrient enrichment happens when you add fertilizer to the ground. So you want to think about like areas where there's a lot of either like farming going on or where people are putting a lot of chemicals on their lawns to keep their lawns healthy. And the nitrogen that people add to fertilize these surfaces is more than the plants need. And that excess nitrogen, the extra nitrogen that's there that is normally fertilizing the plants, but it's more than the plants actually need, goes out into our rivers and streams and lakes. And what this does is it causes there to be extra nitrogen in like aquatic areas. Oh. And so this extra nitrogen causes more plants to grow in lakes and ponds and streams. And you have seen this probably in little ponds or lakes here in Minnesota that are scummy looking, that look like they have green slime on them, or that have lots and lots of algae around, or have a lot of weeds in the shallow waters or even in the deep waters. And so this is caused by nutrient enrichment, where the lake or pond or stream is getting more nutrients than it normally would. And so its ecosystem is getting totally disrupted by this excess nitrogen. This excess nitrogen can also be transported through the air. And so it can be transported through the air to other areas that might even be far away from these agricultural areas where there is excess nitrogen being added. So we have all of these different air pollutants that enter into our air. And we have pollutants that are the primary pollutants. Those are directly emitted by something like carbon dioxide, like particulate matter, those little tiny particles. You could think of them like soot, leftover little bits of stuff that wasn't burned. And then we have secondary pollutants, and those are things that are created by chemical reactions with the primary pollutants. And so all of these are a really big part of air pollution in our atmosphere. And we're going to keep learning about the chemistry and how we can understand these different air pollutants and actually what they are like here in Minnesota. And that will be our task for the next 2 weeks.